Real Agriculture presents the Bushels and Bytes podcast, brought to you by the Canadian Agri-Food Automation and Intelligence Network. Welcome to another episode of the Bushels and Bytes podcast, and I am super excited today because, when we were putting together the guest list, potential people we could chat with, a name that came to the surface repeatedly as a must-have is an entrepreneur, somebody that has a lot of expertise in the livestock sector, and I am so excited to be able to chat with Shari Vanderpool of CATTLEytics today. Shari, how are we doing?
We're doing great. It's summer here, and we're just enjoying the weather up here in Canada.
Okay, well, hey, tell us about CATTLEytics. And this is obviously a passion. It's a company that is making, really forging some new ground. Talk about what it does.
Yeah, so the concept behind CATTLEytics really is to use tools in the best way possible to support people in agriculture. And that's more specifically people tied to cattle. So within CATTLEytics, we have two parts of our business. One of them supports other businesses that are already working in agriculture, but then we have another half of our business that really focuses on creating new tech, mostly within the dairy industry, in order to be able to help dairy farmers really put all of the pieces together. We've got three elements of that. One is we streamline everything to do with their team. It's a really people-focused portion of it. The second thing we do is we have a digital twin of a dairy farm. And the third part of that too is that we provide insights that are, third generation insights where we're using things like machine learning and linear regression to be able to really answer some of the questions that have been tougher to answer in the past.
What was the inspiration to start the business?
Well, I first studied computer engineering. I went on to work in Northern Ireland in data mining, worked at IBM for almost 10 years. As a developer, went up to leading a team and got to a point where, that wasn't really connected with my passions. I became a veterinarian. And then after becoming a large animal veterinarian, I knew that I didn't necessarily want to do routine veterinary work. I wanted to more so work in the systems and look at the way that things like dairy farming happens and see where we can use tech to really really fit that gap that's occurred between the different pieces of precision agriculture that are out there and the everyday experience of that dairy farmer or team working on that farm.
So as you think, so how long has the company CATTLEytics been around? When did you start?
Just over 10 years. So 2014.
Yeah. Oh, 10-year overnight success is it as the saying goes.
Well, I think because honestly that we were pretty quiet about what we did up until 2021. A lot of people didn't know much about the company or who was in it. But really in 2021, we started connecting more directly with for instance, dairy farmers, the public, letting people know what we were doing. And that's really where our name has a bit more recognition as of late, but we've definitely been at this for a while.
What have been some of your early challenges that you have faced in this journey?
Um, I mean, in the whole journey, honestly, I think a lot of people, myself included, you figure out what you're good at, you start to double down on what you're good at, you go to university and you come out and it just seems like, your life is this stream and you just go along the stream and it takes you to this destination, you work for X amount of years, you retire, and it's like it's written for you. And I think really it was taking stock of the fact that it doesn't have to be like that. And as you know yourself, you can write the story yourself, right? And when you take a second and say, I don't need to be a recipient of life. I can create things myself. I can create ideas. I can, that's really, I think, the beginning of interesting journeys. And for me, really making that move, it was it was that realization I started spending about a day a week with a large animal veterinarian. And I was, I got to know a lot of dairy farmers, especially. Um, and I did that for about 3 years. And I just found that that was my favorite day of the week. And the problems were so compelling. And the reasons why we should care about this are so important, so foundational. And just that in combination with being outdoors, being connected to, nature and biology, but also just the real personal stories. I mean, it was such a win for me to want to work in that space.
I think one of the challenges right now for a lot of people as they're in the innovation side of agriculture is trying to keep up. It just feels right now like there's just this rapid rate of change. Like whether it's artificial intelligence or like, that's obviously the buzzword of the day when it comes to innovation. Like as the entrepreneur, do you find that to be challenging to stay like on that leading cutting edge as you're talking to you're building out your business?
Yeah, it is and it isn't. So I'll tell you the two different sides about this because yeah, of course, it can be for an entrepreneur almost panic inducing to try to keep up with all of the different innovations. I get that. At the same point in time, when it comes to our company, um, I have the confidence in the team and the confidence in our expertise that you just can't get that team or that expertise anywhere else. Somebody was asking me, like, why should I work with CATTLEytics? And I was saying, who else are you going to work with? I mean, it's very difficult to find a team of, we have about 14 people that are truly cross-trained in agriculture as well as, deep technologies. And these are people that are often children of dairy farmers, or they've been in the cattle industry for 20 plus years, but they're also computer scientists or mechatronics engineers, and so when it comes down to it, yeah, we're definitely, working at the forefront of technology. And there's some things that we're doing that nobody else in the world is doing. And that's really amazing. But if somebody beats us there, we have a solid foundation, and we understand this. We're on farm. Somebody almost gave me the best compliment when they said, your team is in the farm gate. That's how I see you. Um, and that connection with really being on farm, in the farm, understanding what the day to day is means that even if we're not first to the game all the time, um, that legitimacy is just it takes, decades to build. So
Have you had good success or luck recruiting like the nerdiest of farm kids to, that like are they grew up on the farm, but they're also really super interested in some of the computer science and the coding and all the things that you're doing? Have you had good luck finding those people?
absolutely. Well, I mean, hopefully, even with this amazing podcast, we can
Yeah,
get out to
this
some
may
of these
help.
because the Venn diagram is like it's a small overlap, but definitely those are the people we're looking for. And I mean, like nerdy or not nerdy, it's just there's people that really just jump into that tech and they have that mindset of, and you catch those people on the farm and you see, oh, I could do this faster, or maybe I could build this, or and they're often people who have like 20 spreadsheets if they're running the farm and you know, uh, they've really filled the gap with their own inventions. Those are the farmers we want to talk to, as far as where we go next, because we're really here to serve, dairy farmers and to move the industry forward. But also for anybody who's in that space too. I mean, this is like hopefully we're doing exactly what you want to do, which is really building a team around that group of people who say, hey, I bet we could do this better.
Yeah, we always talk about the shortage of people to work in this industry.
Mhm.
And there's only so many farm kids. Like you said, that Venn diagram, it can be the middle can be a little bit small at times, depending on what sector or piece of the sector you're focused on. But we always talk about how, like, listen, if you're interested in science or, sales or, in this case, computer science, there's great opportunity in our industry. And even if you haven't thought of it at first, when you bring in those computer science grads, for example, and they maybe have no ag background,
Yeah.
and you show them an open their life to the world of agriculture in the computer science field, what typically is their response or their reaction? Are they surprised how much tech's being used in farming, or do they already kind of know that?
I think there's somewhat like what I find is that if you're not tied into agriculture, the knowledge gap is almost a bigger knowledge gap than any other industry. Like most of the education I think for kids tied to farms comes from, the storybooks that they looked at when they were 3. So there's such an antiquated view of farming, and we're not like that with, almost anything else. When you look at schools and books, they don't show a school from the 1950s or 1910s, right? But when you look at a farm, it's a farm from the 1910. Like why, in other areas we don't have that gap. And so there is a jump. But to your first point, what I'd say is that what we're trying to do, like we have people all across Canada working at CATTLEytics, but I would say that especially in, the Southern Ontario area where I'm based, we really want to be that solution for people, because I find that people are in farming and they're like, wow, this doesn't quite fit. Like that day to day, keeping the farm running doesn't do it for me. But yet the creativity of like, inventiveness, that is where I'm excited. But then there's not a job for that person, and that's what we're really trying to do in Southern Ontario, especially, but within Canada, is make this a center for people where if they want to get into this, they have an option, and we want to really be that hub, ideally for the world, where people travel to Canada, to North America to see what amazing tech we're doing. But that really means giving those creative people the opportunities, and they can do that within our company. Um, and then when you talk about the difference between the expectations and what they see on farm, I find the general public as well, there's some things that they assume through the media, and if they just watch the media, they imagine giant farms all across, and I'll just speak in terms of Canada, but
Yeah.
all across Canada. They imagine really old tech at the same point in time. They imagine a disconnect or a lack of caring for animals, and then when we actually like ask them to, is this based on any personal experience? When you drive down the highway, how big are those farms? Like if you know anybody in the dairy industry, do they care about their animals? And I also strongly believe that farm size has really no relation to how well animals can be taken care of, or, or the level of, the quality of employment that people can get there. I've seen small farms that do that amazingly well, and I've seen big farms that do that amazingly well. So I think just assuming smaller is better isn't the case, but at the same point in time, having the average dairy farm size be about 100 cows seems to blow people's minds because they were picturing something so much bigger. So this miseducation is a huge hurdle to get over for people, because um, you can't start to talk about things like policy or understanding, dairy systems if you don't understand the foundations of what exactly exists today, even.
Yeah. I think you're bang on. Are the human brain, or just how we perceive size relative to husbandry or quality of product, it is not like always true. It's not always not like
Yeah.
it's not like this, like one or the other.
Mhm.
There's a whole bunch of versions. And that's one of the things about agriculture. There's so much variety in how there's not like this standard. There is best management practices, but it's not like to the code of a book where it's like this is exactly how we do it at this auto plant in Canada, and we do it exactly the same at the auto plant in Brazil. It's not like that.
It's different because, especially because it's so tied to the environment, right? And
Yeah.
so how those farming practices, if you're talking about New Zealand where everything's so pasture based compared to, Canada where I mean, if do I want to be as a dairy cow out in -40? I don't, right? And so we need to have housing options. It's definitely very different. But I think people get it a little bit if you think about your experience at restaurants. you've been to a small restaurant that's absolutely fantastic, and you've probably been to a small restaurant that's terrible. I would say that if you're a very large restaurant chain, it's extremely difficult to get large being terrible. You can get large being mediocre, but I would say that on the small side, maybe there's a bit more variation, just like there is with, restaurants, for instance. But in Canada, and in the States, just like there's health checks at restaurants and there's standards, there's the same type of standards and there's the same type of checks. So it's, knowing the facts when you have those phrases like, oh, I just don't want antibiotics in my milk. And it's like, every load of milk is tested for antibiotics. There's not antibiotics in your milk. I mean, it's those pieces of information that I think really have to get out there over and over to change that understanding of of really how safe milk is, how safe the products that we eat are, um, and how so many places in the world they're just trying to get above the tier of having simply safe food.
Yeah.
Like they're worried about going to the grocery store and getting food poisoning, or maybe it's not a grocery store, maybe it's the side of the road. Like we have so jumped that hurdle that it doesn't even click into our heads that that was the issue for, thousands of years.
Do you consider yourself a disruptor then?
Um, I would say that I like to write my own story, and as such, as we were talking about sort of following, the stream where life takes you versus writing your own story. If you're writing your own story, I mean, at times that's going to be different. If you call that disruptive, then I guess so. But I think when most of the times when I've been really inspired to do something, it's tied to people I know and problems and systems. And I think, every day I'm like, if I'm bringing value to the people I'm working with, then I'm doing the right thing. Like then, success is going to follow because we're going to bring good things to anybody we work with. And as such, I mean, is that disruptive in a positive way? I would say that, we're not trying to break systems for the sake of breaking them. But if a system is holding people back, then we want to change that.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple times, Sherry, about how passionate you are about the team and the people around you, and that that shared goal objective from a business perspective, or providing solutions to fixing a problem. But I also sense you're very passionate about the customer as
Yeah.
well, and those relationships.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I'd say that when I was still working as an engineer, and I was out with dairy farmers, and I started, for instance, um, I think at that point I was actually working up at Chalk River, they have a nuclear research station up there. So they were really focused on preventative maintenance. And so I started thinking about the concepts of preventative maintenance as it relates to dairy farming, of course. Um, and so one of the farmers I was working with, I got to know him pretty well and said, "Hey, can I look at your data and can I play around with this?" And I started modeling his data. So I could get within about 3% of his, milk predictions, his mastitis incidents, all of this kind of stuff. And I was pretty excited about this. But then I looked to, I was doing this in the spring and I'm sitting there in his, excuse me. I was doing this in the spring and I was sitting there in his office,
Yeah.
and I look back to October and my numbers were way off what he actually produced. He produced way less. And I was trying to figure out why it was off. It was on point the entire year. And then I talked to him and I said, "Why in the world would I be predicting your milk is this? And your milk is actually so much less in October." And it seemed to happen just like that. And he was trying to think about it and he couldn't come up with anything. And then I said, 2 years before it did almost the same thing. And then he was like, I know what it was. I switched to green corn silage. So, his silage wasn't quite ready. He knew he shouldn't really feed it to his cows yet, but he ran out of feed, right? Is he going to buy more feed? That's expensive. So he fed, the corn silage before it was ready. And of course, it's unpalatable. It's, there's going to be a milk drop. But, looking at the models, I was like, well, did you realize it wasn't until February the next year that you actually came back up to the level of production that you should have had. So it took that long because you have all those early lactation animals that, are having a lactation curve like this. And if you affect that right at the start, the entire curve is affected. So it wasn't, a couple week issue. It was a month-long issue costing tens of thousands of dollars. And, when you're talking about dairy farming as well, one of the reasons why I find it so interesting is because it's not like other production methods where, things are relatively stable, or if you have things like growth curves, they're relatively easy to follow. When you're looking at lactation curves, lactation one is like this. Lactation two, is a little bit higher. Lactation three, you've got that nice peak. But then you have animals that are freshening at different points. And so you have all of these curves that you're adding up to get to the total milk. So when you're looking at the effect of some sort of change, it can actually be really insidious. So it's difficult to actually take out what is causing this. If you have a feed change, a ration change, it can be hidden just because you have lots of animals that just freshened in and made your total milk look like a lot. So that's one of the reasons why I find this continuously fascinating is because it ties, the people to the animals to these really interesting complex systems. And then when you talk about Canada, where we have supply management and you're trying to hit a consistent amount of milk every month,
Right.
right? The decision you make that to make that month, that month's milk really happens years before. So you're making decisions on which animals to breed, you're making decisions on which animals to keep and which animals not to keep. And then it's like you're making a bet, but the production projection is so far out. And then that piece of it is complicated. So all of that stuff, like, we're expecting dairy farmers to be potentially computer scientists. And I'm saying, no, we'll take care of that for you. We'll do the modeling for you. We'll help you, really achieve what you want to. Because when you're running a dairy, it's kind of like, these animals are like Olympic athletes and they need the systems to get them to their potential.
It takes skill to be able to communicate data and analytics because this is an industry that, and it's not alone, there's others, but this industry, there's a lot of decisions that are made based on experience,
Hmm.
based on gut, based on tradition. And we have, everybody's in different, like on that pendulum or that spectrum. There's a lot of people moving along in terms of how much data you use in your decision making.
Hmm.
Being able to communicate that, especially in that transition period at some point, kind of in the middle there, that's not easy. Takes a certain skill, I think. Do you think about it that way, or does that just come naturally?
Well, I think because so much of what we do actually backs up those gut feelings.
Okay.
So for instance, when you're talking about drawing off a cow, we'll say approximately 2 months before her next lactation, like people sort of have the sense of that's what to do, that's I give her a break from being milked for a couple months. But the fact is that, sometimes this isn't quantified with their animals with, modern data, or actually, you don't ask yourself what happens to those animals health wise if you shorten or lengthen, that dry off period. And they'll tune that dry off length based on how old that animal is, how much milk they're making. They'll kind of use their gut to make those choices. But what you find is that even though they might be making the right choices from a gut feel, that's very hard to scale up. And they could be doing the right thing, but we're giving them the data and the numbers to actually back up what they're doing. And then we're allowing that to scale across multiple animals.
That makes sense.
So, the care that they're giving to that one or two, if they only had, or back in the day, a lot of people had 12 cows. The care they could say, you know what, she's not milking that well. I'm going to dry her off earlier, give her a little bit more of a, time off. It's not worth us to milk her. Like they have that sense. But when you're trying to manage that across 500 animals, for instance, that becomes really difficult to do. So I think very little of what we're doing goes against that gut feel. I think more so what we're doing is taking those gut feels, saying, do you know what? You've been doing this for this long because of these reasons. And we're going to quantify that, right? It's just like that farmer who said, I know I shouldn't feed them corn silage. That gut feel was true. It's just, can we give you numbers as to how impactful that gut feel is? And so by backing that up, I find that often there's very little disagreement between that sense of I have a feeling this is what I should do. We're just giving them the data to say, well, this is a big deal. You should put more effort into this, even so.
Yeah, and if you can translate that data into, you know, digestible or, numbers that have a higher efficacy,
Yeah.
you can really it sinks in better, it resonates more, and it allows you to understand some of the decision making. And so, like return on investment or return, in simple sort of fashions, like, hey, if you use this kind of feed, produces X amount of input, this return on investment versus that kind of feed. It really brings better decision making into the fold, or at least the higher probability of better decisions.
Right, exactly. Because, you could have a sense that, my cattle will do just as well on this versus this. But, if you can quantify that, and especially if you bring into you know, to the whole equation, market prices and those kind of things.
Mm.
Those are things that go beyond gut feel. It's just, when the cost changes, it changes how you do things. But I would say that for the communication piece too, we do find that people today are overwhelmed by the amount of data being sent to them, and so we're really focused on curating that and curating it towards specific decisions that they need to make. So if they're already making a decision, for instance, on which animals to breed, can we make that decision easier? Can we create projections to suggest what are the chances of that animal staying with your herd or having a calf? Or, so we try to tie that information to areas where they're already making a decision, but would love a bit more, background to that. In a way, we sort of look at it like, have you ever seen the movie Moneyball?
Oh yeah,
Where-
for sure.
Yeah, with the baseball team where you use stats to make the best baseball team.
Mhm.
We really look at that as the way that we think about, a herd of dairy cow, right? So for instance, how do you put together your dream team of players for your next season with the best stats possible? And often that ties to how you do production, who does well on your farm. That might be slightly different than the genomic potential for animals. And that might also be affected by their experiences in early life. For instance, if they have enough colostrum or if they've had something like a calf pneumonia. So really it's, if you can put together your best team of animals, using stats, like what a cool thing that is. How much more confidence do you have in the decisions you make? And then tied to the communication, we have, for instance, on farm, we have digital whiteboard. So that actually can, if you go to some of the farms that are using our system, you'll go into the break room and you'll see, a computer screen. But this was really because we were on farm and in every single staff room, there's a whiteboard there with phone numbers scrawled on, with some stats on there. And we're like, let's just make this digital and let's put that on everybody's phones too, so that it's something that already exists on farm, but how can we make it so that as you scale, these systems scale as well, so that, the farm manager can actually update a stat or can send out an acknowledgement or assign you a task, and tag your cow as you would tag it on Instagram and say, at 123, needs to be checked for lameness. And right now, the farms we're talking to, I just filmed with Dragon's Den. And so I called a couple of the farms ahead of time and said, what does this mean to you? And and I was pretty surprised because they were like, it's like 2 hours a day I save, and I'm the manager. Like it saves my team
Wow.
hours. And that's the communication piece with the team because we have an app, we've got, a whiteboard, we have all of the information about the cow. We take it from different systems, so if they have on-farm systems, we say, okay, you don't have to change what you're doing, but we want to make that data more accessible, more tied into what you're doing every day. And they're just like, it's amazing. We have language support, so we're using AI to do translations. So, for instance, we're thinking of the experience of a farm worker showing up and maybe, English isn't a first language. So you show up and you're getting instruction too fast and you're not sure how to do things here. Maybe you did things in a different country. How do we make that experience better? So we're using AI also to create like Spanish language podcasts, all of these things to really think through that full experience because one of the big things is staff retention. And if they have a positive onboarding experience, then they're going to stay. And then all the stats and the insights, that just, that adds to the why. Why are you doing things this way?
So where is this headed? Like, what do you think the trajectory looks like for whether it's, specifically the CATTLEytics or just the industry in general as we look at some of the innovations that are in front of us?
So I like when technology comes out, it doesn't always get better. And let me put it this way. Some of the capabilities that are available with AI may not be, available in the future, or maybe only available at a very high price. And there's reasons for that. I mean, like we find that, for instance, when we think of, when we think of online streaming, right? You used to be able to go on, and there was a time where it was streaming piracy was a really big issue, and people could stream whatever they wanted, they could download whatever they wanted, they could do whatever. It was a bit of a free for all, and then that tightened up. And now there's, very controlled channels. When it comes to AI, for instance, that could be the same way, where it ends up being a bit of a free for all for now. And then there could end up being very controlled channels to access that through a very, cost-based structure. So right now we're still figuring out a lot with this new, burst of AI technologies. And that will change over time. And it might actually mean that we have less access to the technology as the technology matures. But when it comes to, using it, I think it's so great for agriculture. And the reason is that it does a lot of the stuff that, either isn't being done or is the stuff that, farmers hate to do or producers or, cattle owners. So if you're talking about monitoring, the ability to use computer vision to monitor is going to just get better so that as you go along, if there's a calving happening or if there's body condition scored being lost or, if the gain isn't happening the way you want it, like that doesn't become a bit of a guessing game and, taking cattle over scales or it becomes something that you just know. Um, and also, I think right now, one of the struggles for a lot of people is that they don't want to be in front of a computer all the time. They went into agriculture or farming because they want to be out, out on the farm. And so the ability for these systems to help them with reporting, to help them with, staff training, all of those things ideally helps them get back in front of the animal so that they can do what they do really well and these systems can do what they do really well. And a lot of the things that it does can take off that kind of, like burden tied to, tractors needing to be in the field all the time, like harvest being so difficult, like all the so if you know exactly where you sprayed or where it really we don't need people to necessarily operate all of this machinery potentially in the future. So I think it will take away some of those jobs that people have done. But I think it will just take us to the next level and change those jobs into something that ideally is more mentally stimulating, is more interesting, is more tied into why you go into farming in the first place.
I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, there's like okay, hey, how is AI impacting our offer to the customer, our service, our service delivery? or a product. But then there's also like the internal, how the sausage is made and how AI impacts our own internal workflows. And you're in the world of analyzing data. So
Mhm.
like AI applies so much to your workflow. Talk about some of the challenges as the entrepreneur trying to figure out, where it fits and where maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is that it's like the judicious use of AI. And that's really where I will see, I think you'll see people being successful or not, because it's like just like you have greenwashing. You can put AI in front of everything and excuse me. You can put AI in front of everything, but is it truly AI? Is AI actually helping you in that front? And so I mean, we had the first chatbot out there, agricultural chatbot tied to specifically dairy. And but we've iterated through that a whole bunch of times, and in some areas really limited the amount of AI that's being used for elements of that because we want to have that trustability piece of it. And so parts of it we have actually scaled back and use more trusted systems. And then elements of it tied to, for instance, the natural language processing so that, when somebody says, you know, do I have an issue with mastitis? Has that increased over time? We can now pull that information, give answers to that with a lot more confidence by tuning how much we use AI for and how much we don't. So I think that will be a decision for a lot of people. I think they'll throw everything at it and then say, a bunch didn't stick. And, you need to have systems that people can trust. If, it doesn't matter how complex it is, if you can't actually trust what it's giving you, then it's not worth it. And so yeah, I think you do need to understand these things. I know I've spoken a few times specifically on the topic of AI. For dairy farmers, and and gone through examples of like what is a neural network, what is a random forest, and give farming examples. And as soon as you give a farming example, people are like, oh, I get it, right? Because they're not complex concepts because they're how our own brain works. It's computers emulating our own brain's thinking. So you can get it pretty easily. But I think having that basic understanding of it, understanding how these systems come about can make you as a consumer or as a chooser of AI a lot smarter as to what questions you're asking. What data was this used? What data was used to train this, machine learning algorithm? Where have you tested this? Does this work in this situation? Or you can ask some really smart questions about tech that has AI in it to find out if this is going to work well for you. So I was on a plane with somebody who is a pretty senior person in a well-known software company, and I was telling him that I was speaking at the Dairy Farmers of Ontario meeting and talking about all these machine learning concepts and explaining what neural networks were, and he was like, do dairy farmers know this stuff? And I'm like, yeah,
Yep.
they like, do they? And I was talking about lactation curves, and he's like, do they know what a lactation curve is? And I'm like, yes, they know all this stuff. Like they're really smart in general. And they operate a business, they have to understand biology, they have to understand, animal husbandry, they have to, they run, they have millions of dollars, in the mix, in their investments, and they work really hard. Uh, yeah, they're an incredible population to work with. And he was just astounded. Like he was absolutely floored that, this was the level of knowledge. And I think as like in the agriculture industry, we have to keep on educating ourselves, understanding what questions we want to ask, understanding, enough about the system to be, uh, to make the right decisions. And that's what we ask for people to understand about agriculture too. Like we were talking about uh, people making dairy policy without understanding what dairy farming is about. The same goes for, we have to do it as well. We have to understand some of these concepts before making a judgment as well, because that's what we ask for people to do to us.
Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is the farmer of the future and some of the skills and capabilities, characteristics that that primary producer is going to have in order to succeed in this trajectory of changing environment. What comes to mind for you? What is that farmer of the future? What do they need to have?
Yeah, and that might be a little different in different systems around the world. It's going to be different in Canada versus the US. Um, uh, you definitely need to um, uh, in US, it's very difficult to operate at a smaller scale. In Canada, there's a lot more. There's mechanisms that help support that. At the same point in time, there's a difference between surviving and thriving too. And I think if you wanted to thrive in Canada, then, understanding what tech's out there, using it in a way that's smart for you. I mean, the answer might not always be tech, but also really understanding our people. Because I find that a lot of farms that struggle, like their biggest struggles when you ask them, they say, I'm great with cows, but I'm not great with people. And the fact is that people on farm will have, if they have a great onboarding experience, if you're understanding all of their, you know, um, all of the issues that they face on farm. For instance, I was down on a farm in Georgia, and they had everything from housing to daycare to, they had all of those systems set up for people so that when they went to that farm, they knew they'd get a great place to live. They knew that if they were working, their kids would be taken care of. They really saw that whole arc, for that person. Then, you continue to have a thriving place. So tech or no tech, I think it's really people enjoying showing up to work and then using the tech to support that because you just can't scale without that.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so I think people and then tech that works with it.
That's interesting. I thought you were going to say um, a passion for like data. I actually thought that's what you were going to say, but maybe that's table stakes.
Well, I think I mean maybe sometimes I'm reminded that some of the amazing dairy farmers we work with tend to be pretty data forward. So sometimes I see a subsection of people who are already so excited about data and numbers. So I could be a little bit biased in my group. But I would say that I think it's people over tech. But I think to scale, you can't do the people piece anymore if you don't have the tech. So you will somewhat fall apart, right? If you don't have the systems to support that growth, then what you intend on a team of, 5 is not what you can actually pull off on a team of 50. So the two are really intertwined. And making those big decisions, being able to tune those big decisions, you can keep to the status quo somewhat, but if you really want to achieve, like if you want to, or if the market becomes tighter and you need to be the one that stays ahead, you really need those insights because then you need to know how you can tune it to be more competitive.
Well, that's the future for the farmer. What does the future look like for Catalytics?
Well, we're always looking to see where the opportunity is to bring value to people. Um, so as opportunities come up, we are fairly agile in taking up those opportunities as they come. I do say that the place I'm most excited about are some of the um, we have over 200,000 dairy cows on our platform, and we're getting more every month. And the really cool thing is that if I have an afternoon free or something, and can actually dive in there and look at effects of lameness on whatever like milk production, or I can do almost like a PhD's worth of work in an afternoon now with our data systems, and that is so cool. It really gives us so much potential to leap the industry forward in some of these areas because we have all of the things together. We have the data streams coming in. We have the cows there. We have the machine learning algorithms that are able to to connect those pieces together. So, I mean, it's a really exciting front. And then on top of that, we have a new exciting AI release coming out in a couple months' time. So I can't say too much about that, but that's going to change things.
Oh, I thought you were maybe going to break it right here.
Uh,
That'd have been good. That'd have been good.
TBD.
Okay, so you've worked in the corporate world. You've
Mhm,
worked for other leading entrepreneurs. Now
mhm.
you're leading your own entrepreneurial journey. What advice would you have to somebody that's thinking about starting their own business in agriculture, whether that's an ag tech or it's just their own entrepreneurial business?
Well, apparently I don't know if I give great advice because somebody from our team went to a startup event and ran into somebody who was, I mean, it was so kind, was inspired by me to actually start up a business and said that they talked to me and I was curious what I had said to them. And she told me that I had told them, like, don't do it. Don't start, don't do it. And then they were like, I was so inspired. I still quit my job and still did it. So they're doing great and they love it.
Mm.
Apparently my advice was don't do it. But uh but I think the thing is that you have to like if you're not super passionate about it, like it's you have to be able to get over the humps, right? It's stuff is tough. And so you have to really want it. And then if you do, really connecting with awesome people. I mean, I had some amazing groups that we worked with, especially at the start, feedlot health services, dairy management service, like some really amazing people that had the same type of, like-mindedness and were much further along in the journey. So connecting with them and seeing how they do things is really important. Getting into the industry, having the credentials, you have that solid foundation to your business. Um, and then just having an awesome team that you can have fun with, that's all great.
And you say passion, but it's like a lot of people can have passion for the job. I love my job. I love what I'm
Yeah.
doing. But to me, it's like I think it's even deeper than like just
Yeah.
you're probably understating that passion a little bit. I've heard,
Yeah.
like it's really about that. It's like in that belly hunger to really solve problems for people.
Yeah, and you have to have grit, like
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
like it's like you're doing a marathon, and yeah. So because yeah, exactly. You could love running, but if you're going to stop halfway when it gets hard, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, and there's been some really like hard times, some hard things to get through, um, and I just say that in those cases, I have smart friends in other industries. I talk to them. I get their best, takes on things. If I was going into an area that was unknown, I'd take courses. I'd do online courses for whatever I didn't have enough background in. Um, and then, when we're doing this stuff, I would say that we take risks, but we take very calculated risks. So, having a good safety net. Also, we've gotten to the place where we have with amazing funding from groups like Kane and that's through the federal government and Fed dev funding, but we've also still gotten to the place where we have a full platform. We've got amazing customers. We're making groundbreaking software with no external investment, and that's not very common, and that's been pushing a stone uphill to be able to do that. So you know putting all those pieces together, grit, interest, background, passion, and also like at the end of the day, I think that's one of the amazing things about you talked about computer science students coming and working with us at times. Like a lot of them are looking for that why, right? They're like, I'm going to spend my whole life doing this. Why am I doing this? And then understanding that some of our findings, some of our insights have like direct bearing on the welfare of, cattle. or the welfare of farmers and their mental health and their experience. And it really makes a big difference. And what a juxtaposition of, potentially impacting sustainability, impacting, the people that are making our food, which is such a foundational thing. It really gives that why to so many people.
Awesome stuff. Shari, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Bushels and Bytes podcast.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me.